welcome to the Go Higher Frequency Astrology channel. My name is Suzanne. Today I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Leo solar eclipse that's happening on Wednesday, August the 12th, and how this Leo solar eclipse relates to the Aquarius solar eclipse that happened in March at the onset of the Iran war. I'm going to be talking about what this eclipse means for the United States, as well as the themes that could be showing up for you personally. I'll leave timestamps below in case you want to skip around to the parts that interest you the most. After traveling through the quarter of initiation, when we started the Iran war, we've traveled through the quarter of civilization as we've tried to cement our gains. Now we're at the beginning of the quarter of duality, where we are confronted with the polarity point, the person on the other side. We are now at the opposite side of the wheel from the Aquarius eclipse that happened in March. Whereas the Aquarius eclipse gave us a glimpse of where we were headed because it was on the North Node, the Leo eclipse is showing us what we need to shed to move forward because it's a South Node eclipse. A North Node eclipse is considered a gateway, pulling new experiences into our lives in accordance with where we are meant to evolve, while a South Node eclipse is considered a releasing point. It's an ending of something or someone that has outgrown its usefulness in our lives. And that usefulness might not be our connection with it, but it's because that person or thing has reached its ending point. Now, with a Leo South Node eclipse ruled by the sun, the current elite leadership is starting to lose their influence. Are you starting to feel that? The gold-plated everything that has been foisted upon us is starting to lose its glam or shimmer, if it ever had that. To some people, it did, but it's starting to lose its glam. And the current influencer model is starting to also lose its shimmer. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed a lot of articles coming out that talk about these influencers. And I've noticed a couple of influencers who are going crazy in one way or the other. And so that's starting to lose its grip on what is held up in society as a role model to where we want to go toward. We may be saying goodbye to some high-profile leaders and celebrities during this eclipse. And you see in this human design chart, it's a combination of both eclipses. It's not meant to be a person, although it's oriented in a body graph. You see here that there's an undefined spleen in this chart, which really is demonstrating the themes of this eclipse period. And that is the themes around our health as an organism, the health of the United States, the health of the world, really, because the United States is considered the leader of the free world. And there's this lack of resources or an imbalance of resources. And we have themes around resources, who has too much and who has too little. And there's a theme around the health of society, the mental health of society, the physical health of society, and also all of the natural or unnatural disasters, climate change, things that are happening in our world, the resource constraints of fossil fuels and renewable energies. And you see that playing out in this body graph with this undefined spleen. Now, the Leo eclipse has introduced this hanging gate off of the spleen, whereas in the Aquarius eclipse, this spleen was completely open. And so there was an extreme type of gamble of this attack of Iran, this no fear type of gamble. That's what generally an open center can mean. It's not knowing what to fear, taking these big risks because there's no themes around having a natural sense of fear. That's what being human kind of gives us. You know, we have, in some of us more than others, themes around fear and themes around our health. And people that have an open center don't have any themes. And so they can act in extreme manners because there's no concept to hold on to about what to fear. So from our own personal lives, you know, we are examining in this Leo eclipse, what false idols have we been worshiping that need to be purged from our lives? What false leadership models have we been investing too much faith in to lead us forward into this next phase? What glossy but empty vessels have we been comparing ourselves to? What influencers have we been following that we've been putting our faith into about what's healthy versus what's not? What have we been feeding our bodies? What have we been attaching ourselves to as what makes us beautiful or not? What fulfills our spirit or not? You know, what are we looking toward as healthy models? And are we comparing our individual spirits, our collective spirits to these false idols that we need to actually shed? Because they're false. They're not healthy models of what it is to be a healthy, holistic organism and how we need to move forward into this new reality. So you will feel this eclipse more personally if you have planets around 20 degrees, especially if they are in fixed signs. Now, eclipses are energetic portals and can mark important beginnings and endings in our lives. It can be a time of sudden losses or gains. Eclipses are corridors, and if you are old enough, they can be natural exit points. You don't need to fear eclipses, but they can be natural ending points if you have an older relative or an older loved one. Although, you know, things happen every single day. They are corridors. That is why people get anxious around eclipses. That's why they have a bad rap, but they don't need to be feared. They're definitely a time of increased intensity. And I think we're all feeling that intensity. I have my son at 22 degrees of Aquarius, so it is impacting me personally, and I'm feeling that intensity. And I'm remembering the last time the eclipses were on the Aquarius Leo axis, they were on the other side. That was in 2018. The South Node was in Aquarius, and the North Node was in Leo. And that was during my Uranus opposition. And there were a lot of tumultuous changes that were going on during that period. And the one that impacted me the most was the loss of my father. I found out that he was sick with stage 4 lung cancer during that time, and I lost him a few months later. And his death kind of catapulted me into a lot of changes that were already brewing, but they gave me the energy to make some drastic changes in my life. And now I'm looking at it from the opposite side in a longer viewpoint than just this year. I'm looking at it from the reverse nodal change. And it's almost like it's a full moon of that period. It's a turning point. It's a look into what has manifested. I've gone through my Chiron return. I am exiting the midlife crisis period. And I'm looking at all of the changes that I've implemented in my life, and I am reviewing it. What have I implemented that I'm still into, that's really still something that I want to move toward? How am I doing? What do I need to change? So what about you? Have you noticed a shift in your life lately? Do you have personal planets that will be aspecting this nodal transit? Or perhaps you have these nodes in your chart, or the reversal of these nodes. If you do, and you want to better understand how you are evolving through this cycle, I've just launched an Eclipse reading special. In this session, we'll explore your natal themes and how this nodal transit may impact you in the upcoming year. I'll leave a link below in case you are interested in checking out that special. Eclipses are considered more intense if you are in the eclipse path. And in 2018, if you remember, the eclipse was fully visible in New York City. And that's where I was living at the time. I watched the eclipse. It was also visible where my father was living. So the solar eclipse in August will travel across the Arctic, Greenland, Iceland, the Atlantic Ocean, Spain, and a small corner of northeastern Portugal. And outside the narrow path of totality, there will be over 90% coverage in the UK, Ireland, France, and parts of North Africa. And we can already see there's a lot of things happening in that part of the world, a lot of intensity, extreme weather and fires, wars that are happening, and other things that are happening in that part of the world that is quite intense. And the minor partial eclipse that we will be experiencing is visible in northern and eastern parts of the US and Canada too. So there will be some intensity, but not as nearly as much intensity as there will be in the eclipse path. Located in Washington, D.C., the eclipse falls on the 2-4 cross of explanation. This eclipse is about resources, like I mentioned, and the potential of people to take advantage of our lack of understanding in order to organize and control the resources. If you've been paying attention, there's been a lot of monetary changes happening behind the scenes in the United States, namely the ongoing volatility of the Japanese yen and the unprecedented move by the Fed to prop it up, to keep Japan from selling their U.S. bonds, which would only drive up the U.S. debt interest rates. The Fed has put in place a mechanism for Japan to exchange their bonds for dollars, charging a fee. Now, this exchange was happening in the private market prior to this decision. This Fed decision is why we saw a momentary free fall in the market last week before it rebalanced and is now manically climbing higher again. What cost this move will make in the future remains to be seen, but it's one example of the monetary reset happening behind the scenes. Even though the news has broken through, I can imagine there are a lot of people who are aware of it and less so who understand the potential implications of this move. The new moon is conjunct the midheaven of the chart located in Washington, D.C. And if you look at Scott Besant's natal chart around this eclipse chart, you notice that his sun is at 28 degrees of Leo, aspecting the south node. And you notice that he has a Saturn South node in Aquarius, and Pluto right now is applying to his Saturn degree. Now, people with Saturn nodal conjunctions are people who cannot get away with things. They are going to feel the direct consequences of their actions. And as Pluto gets nearer and nearer that Saturn South node degree, you better believe that he is going to feel some consequences to what he is doing now. He also has his Mars at 29 degrees of Gemini, which was aspecting the last eclipse last year. And it's also very near the Mars in this chart, which I'll talk about soon. He has his moon right on the descendant of this chart. So his chart is really activated during this solar eclipse. As we can see, he's in the news right now with this very consequential decision that he has made. And it is based on his past experience, that Saturn South node. It's based on his time. He was part of Soros's private equity firm where they made bets on collapses of governments around the world. So he's using his Saturnian knowledge of what he did in his private equity days to manipulate the US market, because in his mind, he thinks he's saving the US and Japan from collapsing, when in essence, he is manipulating the market in ways that might be detrimental to the US as we see it play out. The midheaven of this chart is at 26 degrees of Leo, and that is the exact degree of Trump and Netanyahu's Mars's degree. They have their Mars at exactly the same degree. And as I write this in the earlier parts of this week, it seems to signal that the conflict that they both started in Iran is now starting to wind down in a humiliating defeat. Now, things could change by the eclipse period, but we're definitely seeing the impacts of this war, which is Mars-oriented, in this eclipse period. And there have been multiple news headlines I've spotted lately signaling the end of the trickster. Now, with Uranus having just entered Gemini, I highly doubt that, but certainly the period of the material trickster is coming to an end. We are starting to face the reality of the havoc this type of material trickster has had on all of us since Uranus entered Taurus in that 2018 time period. Uranus is what brings us into societal change. It is what brings us into the future. Chiron is this bridge that connects Uranus to Saturn, and Saturn is our material reality. It is what we deal with as far as what brings us into form. It is called the cross of matter. It is what we make reality and what we see as reality. Chiron entered Taurus right before we signed the initial MOU with Iran. And it stationed retrograde just as the news started coming up about the US propping up the yen. But this type of material trickster is not going to leave quietly. Chiron is set to move back into Aries in mid-September for its final review before it returns to Taurus next April. Meanwhile, Mars, the ruler of Saturn in Aries and Chiron in Aries, will join Jupiter in Leo, and they will be very close to the South Node as they transit into the latter part of the year, near the election in Israel and near the midterms in the United States. So this eclipse is a gateway or a sneak preview of what's to come. It falls on the Mars decan of Leo, and it's on a Jupiter degree. It is what we are saying goodbye to. But like I said, the South Node is a part of our reactive nature. It's part of what we need to release, but also what has a strong hold on us. What is our habitual response mechanism? And it is really hard to release the South Node as we are going toward the North Node. And it often doesn't happen until the later parts of that cycle. The eclipse happens next Wednesday, the 12th. It's Mercury's day. And under the terms of this Mercury in Leo. Now, the day before the eclipse, Mercury exchanges information with Pluto as they oppose each other. I imagine this exchange as the hear ye announcement of Pluto's entry into its out of bounds adventure to the south, which happens near this eclipse. And we've talked about this out of bounds nature Pluto to the south as being very revolutionary. It's when the people start to challenge the elites, and it's a destruction period for empires. It's going out of bounds every summer, basically, until 2030. And this is the second year in a row that has gone out of bounds to the south. The first time it went out of bounds, there were a lot of protests that happened in the United States. And so we saw the beginnings of this out of bounds nature of Pluto to the south during that time. So what I imagine this announcement being is, hear ye, the revolution is coming, the revolution is coming. A few days after this eclipse, Mercury and Jupiter will conjoin to start their new 12-year cycle in Leo. Now, this is the second 12-year cycle that Mercury and Jupiter did not meet up in Cancer, which is quite a rare experience. I review this cycle and how it is part of the origins of the United States in a previous video, which I'll link below in case you're interested. It adds a lot of context to the social fragmentation that we've been experiencing. This new conjunction happens to be conjoining right on Vance's natal sun and just past Trump's Pluto degree. Both Vance and Trump have Sag Gemini nodes, which are ruled by Jupiter and Mercury. So anytime these two nodal rulers conjoin and aspect their charts, it's an important turning point. This one is especially important for Vance since it aspects his sun. Will negotiations continue or will they fall apart based on the information Mercury has just exchanged with Pluto, the new power broker? The eclipse theme about escaping a bad situation and this new Mercury-Jupiter cycle shows some promise toward continuing negotiations. This Jupiter-Mercury cycle has transitioned from gate 31 in a line describing an arrogant leader to the gate and line describing retreat into privacy. Negotiations are happening behind the scenes, if you haven't noticed, and that's exactly what this new cycle represents. a retreat, or something happening behind the scenes rather than arrogantly out in the open. When you start tracking astrology, repeating patterns and themes tied to planetary cycles become glaringly obvious. Can you guess what was going on 12 years ago? The last time Mercury and Jupiter met up in Leo. Pretty much the same conflicts we are seeing today, but on a smaller scale. At the beginning of the last cycle, a 72-hour negotiated ceasefire between Israel and Hamas regarding the Gaza Strip had collapsed. There was also a localized, low-intensity conflict between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. These cycles of conflict keep bubbling up to the surface until they climax and recede. At a certain point, the conflicts reach a point of no return and they flip. That is our journey around the wheel. We have these cycles that are repeating in different ways throughout history. And that is just the slow process of evolution, unfortunately. The eclipse is just past a trine with a retrograde Saturn, ruled by this Mars in the 8th house, this Mars at the 0 point of Cancer, a world point. The 8th house is about other people's resources. It's about contracts with other nations. And as you can see, Venus is also applying to an opposition of this Saturn, this destructive drive for resources. Now, I just described an example of what this might look like with the Fed propping up the yen. And of course, all of the obstruction that is happening with the Strait of Hormuz blocking ships that transit important oil to other countries, oil that feeds into all of the mechanisms that provide us life, that provide us fertilizer to grow food, that provides us gas to get around, that provides us with air conditioning and heat and all of the things that we take for granted. You know, we demonize oil, but we've grown quite used to what oil provides us, so we don't even think about it. Right now, we are in this transition between fossil fuels and renewable energy. And there are some people who suspect that renewable energy will not be able to replace fossil fuels, even though we've been attempting to replace that energy source. But we have no idea what's ahead. We have no idea what this is putting into motion. Disaster or some kind of saving grace that pulls us from the brink of destruction. Mars is in gate 15 in the body graph, and this is considered the gate of extremes. And at 0 degrees of Cancer, it's ego inflation. That's what it is labeled. And Mars is ruled by the eclipse. And like I mentioned, it's on a world point and it is in square to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries. And this is another indication of the damaging depletion of resources that is happening right now because of this ego inflation, this drive toward having more than one needs, of causing havoc in other countries to take control of the resources, of hoarding resources, and not making the resources cyclical, hoarding resources for ourselves, having more resources than one needs, and denying the productivity that resources are supposed to demonstrate the reciprocal productivity of resources, the balance that the world needs to be able to sustain itself. Being in harmonic balance with nature means that you are reciprocal in nature. It's not just out of kindness, it's out of necessity that our resources are recycled back into productivity and not hoarded for oneself. And it's gotten quite out of balance with all of the people making money for unproductive gains, for this fantasy world that they're living on the internet. Because at the end of the day, it's life that sustains us. It's not our mind. It's actual food that sustains us. It's actual things that we get from the earth, the beautiful earth that was provided for us to survive. That's what sustains us. And we've gotten out of balance. So we need to find balance again. We have to see the true ramifications of this destruction before we are motivated to change. And hopefully it doesn't come to the point of irreversible destruction before we are motivated as a collective to change. Because if we don't change, we will destroy the planet for all of us. You know, even the wealthy can survive, even though they think they can survive. They can't survive when we're destroying everything that is sustainable about the earth as we have access to right now. We don't have any other colonies. We don't have any place to escape. So we can't very well destroy the shared resources, the sky, the soil. It's impossible to isolate yourselves in today's world without the reciprocal balance that we find when working together. There's a promising kite in this eclipse chart with Venus in Libra in the 11th house of the legislature. It describes this need to clean house. And it connects here with Jupiter in the 9th house, and it is about leadership and the intent of leadership as we're dealing with other countries. And it connects Uranus here in the 7th house, and it is about wisdom in the now and changing the wisdom that we have regarding who we're partnering with, our allies. And then it's connecting to this Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, which is talking about the contraction of our resources and the selfishness that's happening in that contraction. A lot of people get fearful about losing what they've built in their life in the midst of contraction. And so what happens is people get selfish and they want to hold on to what they have. And sometimes they become too selfish. They want too much. They hoard too much. And so there's an energetic flow between all of these planets, which to me describes a resolution of some of the greediness that's happening that's not really taking into account the collective. And how, if we all work together, we could solve some of the issues that we're having right now. And we need to band together as a collective to solve those really difficult problems. We're in transition right now. And we certainly don't need these very greedy people hoarding all of our resources during this time, because it is just going to get more and more chaotic as this happens. So we really need to nip it in the bud right now. So there's some positive signs that are forming. Whether those positive signs actually are implemented in the near future, this is the time of extremes, and we are going to go back and forth in those extremes until we rebalance in this time of change. Now, if you look at this eclipse from the perspective of the Sibley chart, you'll see that the moon, representative of the people, is aspecting this north node. So we're heading toward the collective. We're heading towards something that is more collectively minded. And the kite has Venus in the 10th, so cleaning house as far as our leadership goes. It has Mercury and Jupiter in the 8th. How are we creating new contracts with other countries that are fair-minded, those contracts that help us grow in resources, but is more fair-minded, is more reciprocal in nature? How are we making changes to the government? How are we making changes to what we are doing with our governmental structures, and what we are doing with being taken over by people who do not have our best interests at heart, who are causing a lot of destruction in the world rather than helping our situation. Like I said, there's this overcorrecting that we're doing right now that is taking us from one extreme that will lead to a backlash in the opposite extreme. There's a lot of people on the right that are fear-mongering about socialists taking over, but what they don't understand is that they are driving that extreme response based on their extreme actions. So hopefully we will wake up before we see the complete destruction of our resources, what we've built as a country, as our leadership stance in the world is being quickly destroyed. Hopefully we can wake up and become the leaders that we once were, but in an upgraded fashion with more reciprocity. Hopefully we'll all wake up and start working together. One can hope. This eclipse does have themes about getting out of a very negative situation. So as far as what's going on presently, hopefully we can get out of this present path of destruction. So that's it for me. I will be back to talk about the full moon eclipse as we are releasing what needs to be released from that Virgo Pisces axis that we just had for the last year and a half. What is it that we're taking from that cycle and releasing into this new cycle? I'll be back very shortly to talk about that. But till next time, I hope you survive this intensity. And I hope that you are like me, praying for peace and prosperity for all of us. Talk to you later. Bye.